Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing with our tafsir. So let's just go over what we did last time really quick. And we talked about, so really focused on jinn, right? And we talked about this ayah. وَيَوْمَ يَحْشُرُهُمْ جَمِيعًا يَا مَعْشَرَ الْجِنِّ قَدِ اسْتَكْثَرْتُم مِّنَ الْإِنسِ فَقَالَ أَوْلِيَاؤُهُم مِّنَ الْإِنسِ ربنا استمتع بعضنا ببعض وبلغنا أجلنا الذي أجلت لنا قال النار مثواكم خالدين فيها إلا ما شاء الله إن ربك حكيم عليم. So we went in many details, really not just one. We went in details in regards to this ayah. Number one, يَا إِلَّا الْحَشْرِ. We talked about the different stages on Yawm al-Qiyamah. The different stations, maybe I should say it that way. We also talked about al-jinn and how al-jinn can control or get access to the humans, or the humans can get access to the jinn. And we said that in general, it is haram to get access to them, but some may somehow through different types of, especially let's say connecting with the jinn that are disobedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the jinn know that they're not supposed to be relating with the humans, that they're supposed to be a different world. They know that they're not supposed to be relating with the humans, but certainly you have maradat al-jinn, maybe the ones to not care about the ruling, the principle, and may trespass their limit, and the humans may trespass their limit and actually have access to the jinn, and in particular to do things that are evil like sihr. And certainly we talked about sihr, we talked about magic, we talked about the effect it might have, and we also talked about, of course, the jinn and how to be protected from the evils of jinn and so forth. So there's really a lot to say, but I tried to make it as summarized as possible. I do have many videos about jinn and about sihr and all of that, so check it out, inshallah. Then we left off at this ayah, which is وَكَذَلِكَ نُوَلِّي بَعْضَ الظَّالِمِينَ بَعْضًا. وَكَذَلِكَ نُوَلِّي. I want you to look at this one, because when you look at the word وَكَذَلِكَ, it's extremely important to look at the word كَذَلِكَ. What does it actually tell us? When you look at the word كَذَلِكَ, you see before that the ayat were also using the word كَذَلِكَ again, and what that is supposed to be indicative of, it's basically telling me that there is a pattern. There's a certain paradigm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this world that, well, just as you know that there's a certain pattern in physics, a certain pattern in chemistry, a certain pattern in biology, a certain pattern in economics, a certain pattern in politics, and the list goes on and on. There's a certain pattern in morality as well, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let the things come back and affect basically the person that committed the crime, or the person that did a certain behavior or a certain transgression, etc., and the impact it will have, whether on the individual or whether on the society. Now, in this ayah, just like in the ayah before, it was telling me كَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا فِي كُلِّ قَرْيَةٍ أَكَابِرَ مُجْرِمِيهَا. Every single city would basically have certain figures that are in control of the masses. Certain figures can be political, can be social, can be probably education, within education, the list goes on and on. But that's for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to let us know that you have to recognize there are certain agendas. You want to call it conspiracy, you want to call it, some kind of an agenda. You can call it whatever you want. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that there are these systems, okay? There are these systems that basically have the power over, let's say, the ones that are not aware of the system. Okay, the ones that are not aware of the system, they may claim to be victims, But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that certainly the ones that had made the system, or the ones that would basically, let's say, be in control of the system, they've got their accountability. But the ones that wanted to claim that they are victims within that system, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that while you received a message to claim to be a victim of the system and not necessarily a person that's standing against the system, Islam is telling you, no, you have to be either. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said, اغدو عالما أو متعلما ولا تكن الثالثة فتهلك. Let's look at this quote, because this is very important. Let's look at that. What a cute baby. اغدو عالما أو متعلما ولا تكن الثالثة. I'm going to let you see that one. Okay, let's see this one. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, you could see, he said, and you could see right there, Shu'aib al-Arnaut, and you could see there's that reference right there. What did he say? Ughdu aliman. What does that mean? To protect you from two things. One, you've got the misconception, which basically would put you in a form of delusion, which the mujrimeen would actually plot in order to delude you within your mind. They will indoctrinate you. They will make you think that this is your idea. They will manipulate you to make you think that you are free, to make you think that you are basically making the choice. Why? Because the akabir al-mujrimeen, the ones that are in the system, the ones that are benefiting the most, they're actually going to recognize that there's a way to manipulate the masses, to make them continue working for the cause of those that are in, let's say, in control of the system. So they will use, one, misconceptions, meaning shubuhat, and they will also use the shahawat. Let's write that down. What are we looking at? So we're looking at two things. We're looking at shubuhat. We're talking about shubuhat, which basically means the misconceptions. Okay, the second thing they will use is shahawat. Shahawat, they're basically using lust. So they will use these two methods in order to control whether we're talking about people within the system, whether you're going to school, or whether you're probably just trying to make a living, or whether you are basically a person that's trying to get an employment or whatever. They're basically creating that system to let you be part of those that will be spreading the misconceptions, and or the ones to basically be the consumers of lust. So they'll use things like pornography, use things like use women as well, use alcohol, drugs, anything that will let the person's mind, if they cannot catch them in the misconceptions, at least they'll catch them by playing on their lust and letting them run after these drives. So they will provoke the drives to let the person feel that they're needing to run after these drives. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know about this system. So he was basically letting us know these misconceptions that they would be basically playing on, whether we're speaking about these yamkuru fiha, that they would basically do these kind of plots, and they would be affecting the masses without us realizing. Then number two is that when you look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala letting us know that the foundation to take away the misconceptions is basically فَمَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ, to remove the misconception that these akabir al-mujrimeen are basically trying to get you away from realizing their plot. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, first, you got to recognize your foundation. If you don't recognize your foundation, then you're nothing but a consumer to all the different misconceptions and all the different drives that they are basically inducing within you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, here's that piece of it. فَمَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. That's the foundation. You got to find Islam first, and that's going to help you recognize, one, anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was telling you about their tools. If you don't recognize it through Islam, if you don't recognize your foundation to help you recognize what is a misconception and what is the lost, then you're really going to be continuing within this area, talking about that system, but then going and creating another system that really just is identical to this system. So Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said, in order to protect yourself, you gotta ughdu aliman. You have to either, one, be a scholar, or a talib ilm أو متعلمة, or a person seeking ilm, and do not be the third. In another narration, he said, وَلَا تَغْدُ إِمَّعَ. In one narration, in another narration, وَلَا تَكُنِ الثَّالِثَةَ فَتَهْلَكَ. And don't be the third and end up really getting corrupt. Why? And what is the third? Well, the third is that you're not seeking ilm, you're not a scholar or seeking ilm. In other words, you're just a consumer. If you're just a consumer and you end up really being either a consumer of the misconceptions or a consumer of whatever drives they're trying to put within you, then you're going to be that imma. How to know all of this? That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting you know that there are certain there are certain systems, whether you wanted to call this system Zionism, you wanted to call this system capitalism, you wanted to call it this system communism, you wanted to call the system feminism, liberalism, you can call the systems or jahiliyyah, whatever. At the end, they're going to be in the Quran labeled as jahiliyyah. What is jahiliyyah? Jahiliyyah basically means that the foundation is not based on Allah Almighty. Anything that is not based on a foundation coming from Allah Almighty is considered jahiliyyah. Whether that foundation was the individual or whether that was looking for, let's say, interest, political interest, economical interest, all these different things, well, all of that is basically jahiliyyah. So the foundation to build, let's say, the foundation in the mind, a foundation in justice, social justice, or we're talking about different levels of justice, political, social, economic, etc. That basically is supposed to be based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, the second time that after that ayah, saying that, well, كَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا فِي كُلِّ قَرْيَةٍ أَكَابِرَ مُجْرِمِيهَا, the ayah continues to expose another system. He said, وَكَذَلِكَ نُوَلِّي بَعْضَ الظَّالِمِينَ بَعْضًا بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. What happened? He said, well, there's another system that you may not recognize, but you really have to see that الظالمين كذلك, in the same paradigm, in the same system, there's نُوَلِّي بَعْضَ الظَّالِمِينَ بَعْضًا. The ظالمين are the transgressors. Now, in Lugha Arabiya, when you look at the al, you're going to ask two questions. You're going to ask whether it's a specifying al or whether it's an inclusive al. Okay, what is the difference? When you're looking at a specifying al, it's speaking about something specific. When it's an inclusive al or al-istighraqiyya, would be including any form of whatever noun we're talking about. So in this situation, when it says nuwalli ba'd al-zalimin, this is not ba'da with a dal. This is ba'da with a da. What's the difference between ba'da and ba'da? Ba'da basically means after with a dal. Ba'da basically means from, okay? But in Lugha Arabiya, sometimes the word ba'd can mean from, and can also be farther than just something that is, let's consider it as part of something, and can mean that this is a little more inclusive, to basically include that we're speaking about different positions here. We'll see it in the future, inshallah. كذلك نولي بعض الظالمين, that some of the ظالمين, they would be what? They would be leaders upon one another. In other words, what? Is it leaders or is it supporters? Well, in order to understand whether it's leaders or supporters that the ayah was referring to, we got to first understand the word nuwalli. What does al-wilaya actually mean? Al-wilaya can mean, one, a place of decision, a foundation for decision making. Two, could also mean authority. Three, could also mean to follow something. Now, when you look at this ayah is really being specific. It's telling us that al-zalimin, the ones that would transgress the limits, because the word zalama means to transgress the limit. So the ones that would transgress the limit would actually have one, other zalimin, other transgressors, be one, the ones in their authority, the ones in two, the ones to be the decision makers, three, the ones that they would consider as their place of following. Now, when you look at that one, what is it really giving me an inference? It's telling me that al-zalimin, they have other collaborators, supporters. Al-zalimin, they support one another. So when you look at, for example, Israel is zalima, but guess what? It's actually backed up by the US. When you see this other zalim, one zalim benefits from another zalim's zulm, and then they end up backing one another. Keep this one in mind, because zulm doesn't just come like that. Zulm comes with other zalimin supporting one another. At the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in another ayah basically tells us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let the zalimin overcome the zalimin. What do you mean, the zalimin overcoming a zalimin? So when you have one zalim, the US, for example, right now, every single time, even when everybody, 153 states or whatever countries, whatever it is, basically considering Israel as committing genocide and all of that stuff, then America, whenever in the UN, hey, let's vote that this is not acceptable, we have to sanction Israel. America will be the one to veto. No, we're not going to sanction. Why? Because they're benefiting, because America is benefiting from all of this. So you would have بعض الظالمين would support other ظالمين. But here's one thing, is that another ظالم, because they are racing and competing over whether we're talking about resources or authority, or perhaps even just the two together, you will have another zalim compete with that zalim. China comes in, India comes in, or perhaps maybe a union of China, India, Russia, maybe North Korea, or whatever it is, coming in and starting to compete with the previous zalim. And it isn't at all because they're sick of their zulm, but because they want to get a share of that zulm and those interests and that benefit. Now, what is that supposed to tell me as a Muslim? As a Muslim, it's supposed to tell me to recognize that not because you recognize one zalim at this moment, don't get too impulsive and too emotional and start making alliances that may be the future zalim to probably harm you. You have to be intelligent in recognizing that perhaps maybe China defeats the US, but that doesn't mean that China is a better superpower. Don't confuse yourself. You have to be wise and intelligent to recognize that justice could only be achieved when the basis is on La ilaha illallah. But if the basis is called communist China, or whether the basis is called Hindu India, or whether the basis is called nationalist Arab, or whether the basis is basically called communist Russia, or whatever it is, it's all going to be the same Jahiliyyah. If it's Jahiliyyah, it's going to contain dhulm. It's going to contain transgression. It's going to contain oppression. It's going to contain injustice. Simple as that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that you need to go beyond the system, beyond the misconceptions, and beyond the consumption of using your lust and your drives as basically the ones to be controlled by them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that if you are a person that is driven by misconceptions or that is driven by lust, then you are nothing but a person that is controlled by these dhalimeen. And if you are a follower, then you are going to be accountable exactly like al-akabir al-mujrimeen, exactly like those in, let's say, the highest level of that pyramid. It's going to be the same thing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing us, is educating us, is enlightening us to go and look beyond the system. The ones that look beyond the system are the ones that are free. Why? Because the worst of slavery, the worst type of slavery is not the slavery that used to happen before, but the worst type of slavery is the slavery that makes you not see the shackles and the chains around you, even though it is. The worst of the lies are the lies that contain some truth. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know you have to be really careful, and that this system, whether it's a system back then or whether it's a system today, the idea is the same. And that's why he would tell us Prophet Musa and how he battled a political system or a social system or an economical system or even a system that used magic, or another system like Prophet Lut alayhi salam. It was a type of a social system. It was a type of a certain type of a system that was playing on lust in order to control the masses. And how, whether we're talking about a political system that is corrupt, or whether we're talking about a social system that is corrupt, or whether we're talking about an economical system that is corrupt, just like Prophet Shu'aib, or whether we're talking about a system that basically contains all, just like Prophet Musa, or just like Prophet Nuh's time, it basically, the story is really, that's how it started, but the system is the same. It's just a different puppet playing the game. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when you look at the word kadhalik, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, listen, the system plays out in the same way. They would, one, control your decision making. Two, you would see that many would follow, because when you talk about al-wilaya, you're talking about one, you're talking about control and authority. You're talking about control and decision making. Three, You're talking about control in feeling committed, in feeling that I cannot get out of the system. So you start following because you feel that the second that I will get out of the system, I will not get employment. I will probably end up getting maybe no job, maybe homeless. Maybe I will end up basically not even getting health insurance, getting health coverage, maybe even getting treatment, etc. All these different things. And without you realizing, shaitan basically ya'idukum al-faqr. That's another paradigm. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, listen, shaitan basically plays on making you fearful of poverty, making you fearful of probably losing control, of making you feel that you're going to be you're going to be canceled out, and therefore you're going to be lonely. You're going to be with no support. There's no victory. And of course, the system is making you think that you have to be part of the system. If you're not part of the system, then that means, look at you, poor thing. You're going towards failure and nothing but failure. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that Islam is about your freedom. Islam is about letting you recognize the schemes that they would use in misconceptions, whether that was through the so-called education system or the different schemes that are used in controlling your drives to run after whether fame or whether money or whether women or whether men or whether, hey, trying to somehow dunya. And without us realizing, we become controlled, thinking that we are the ones that are in control, when the truth of the matter, you were being controlled by shaitan. And shaitan had these players that are considered the big guys out there in politics, in cinema, whatever it is. They were playing the axis of shaitan, and they were these celebrities, these figures. They were given different names for, let's call it, for easy access to you, to manipulate you and give you names that may appear people as if it's a position of success. But real, let's at least call them unethical. Okay, let's just call them that. But really low people. Now that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know how these things happen in order for us to be protected, to be free, and certainly to be in leadership. A Muslim can never be a Muslim unless you basically submit to Allah. And that's why when you look at your dhikr in salah, the most important dhikr that you say is Allahu Akbar. Why Allahu Akbar? Because it's to let you recognize that the true leadership, the true power, the true one to give you that decision making and authority, and certainly the one that you must follow, is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if all those akabir al-mujrimeen manipulated you, that true success only comes through them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, كَذَلِكَ نُوَلِّي بَعْضَ الظَّالِمِينَ بَعْضًا. So how did they actually get to that level? And where and what really happened? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it clear. He said, بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. What they had done, and the injustices that they had done, and certainly their race, their competition on perhaps power, competition on of course interests, and looking for the resources to give them power, etc. They'll basically go into competition. So why not have the people of justice overcome al-Zalimin? Why not? Why not the people of justice basically, defeat al-Zalimin? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, well, no. The people of justice are going to be too merciful on these zalimeen. We need another zalim that basically lacks mercy to let them defeat the zalim. Because people of justice have a lot of mercy. And the zalim needs another zalim to defeat them. So looking at it in the situation that we're in right now, the ummah, really, if you were to think of it, there's no doubt that we are in a situation that is far more that we can describe as nothing but completely defeated, weak. You know, there's that hadith that I always remember, even though many years before, I thought that hadith right there, we can't get far worse than that situation. But I was totally wrong. Let's look at this hadith. The hadith goes as follows. Let's get that hadith, right? The Prophet ﷺ basically says in this hadith, yushakul umam. Let's look at that hadith. Yushak al-umam an tatada'a alaykum kama tatada'a al-akalatu ila qas'atiha. Let's look at this one. The Prophet ﷺ says in this hadith that yushakul umam an tada'a alaykum min kulli ufuq. There's another narration. يوشك الأمم تداعى عليكم كما تداعى الأكلة إلى قصعتها. Here we go. كما تداعى الأكلة إلى قصعتها. قيل يا رسول الله فمن قلة يومئذ؟ قال لا ولكنكم غثاء كغثاء السيل يجعل الوهن في قلوبكم وينزع الرعب من قلوب عدوكم لحبكم الدنيا وكراهيتكم الموت. That's one narration. There's another narration, slightly different, but the same meaning. Okay, let's see. What does it mean? He said, it is about to come the time when the nations would come from every corner, from every side, from every area, from every geographical area that you could think of. And they would gather around you the way they would gather around a meal. And then the Prophet ﷺ was asked, will we then be just small in number? And he said, no, but you would be غثاءً. You would be really like a foam, exactly like the foam that would be over the ocean or over the shores of the ocean. And also, يَجْعَلُ الْوَهَنَ فِي قُلُوبِكُم. And inside your heart, there would be al-wahan. In another riwayah, he said, يَجْعَلُ الْوَهَنَ فِي قُلُوبِكُم. And then they said, قَالُوا وَمَا الْوَهَنْ يَا رَسُولَ اللَّهِ. He said, حُبُّ الدُّنْيَا وَكَرَاهِيَةُ الْمَوْتِ. In this one, he continues, وَيُنْزَعُ الرُّعْبُ مِنْ قُلُوبِ عَدُوِّكُم. And your enemy's heart would be emptied of fearing you. Why? Because you love dunya and you hate death. I mean, who loves death? Why are we supposed to love death? And what does that really mean? No, this is an inference of jihad, that not until you recognize that each and every single one of us is going to be targeted with their wealth, with their health, with their own families, they're going to be targeted within their homes, just like the people in Gaza. Not until you recognize that would you really be the ones to protect yourselves and unite in order to change the whole scenario. But as long as the scenario is that you are just running after dunya, running after making family, getting a job, and trying to sustain your life, but akhirah and commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the last thing you were thinking about, how you raise your children to be committed to Islam, how you raise yourself to be committed to ilm, and committed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and committed to sacrifice. That's a thing. The whole thing is about sacrifice. Not until you recognize that you're willing to trade and let go of dunya for the sake of akhirah will you really be a person that is committed to their deen. What does that look like? Not until you recognize that you would not give up on your deen, even if they had basically sold everything to you. You would be not willing or giving you everything, because to you, deen means your life. Not until then would the ummah be strong again. So when you look at this one, what is that basically letting us know? Within this context, what are we talking about here? Well, when you look at بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ, as long as we are in a situation and as a result of our own actions, then we're going to see what we live in basically judge and basically determine the situation that we're in. In other words, your behavior determines the status. Don't question, why am I failing? Well, what are you doing wrong? I can't guarantee success to you, but I can tell you what tools there are. What the tools are. That's what I can tell you. What methods to use. So the Prophet ﷺ was telling us, well, what you need to do is not put the dunya as your main focus. In other words, what? You work for the akhirah. What do you mean work for the akhirah? Like, how do I do that? You work for the akhirah not only as an individual that, yeah, alhamdulillah, I'm going to the masjid, I'm basically taking my classes and studying Islam and everything is good. No, you also have to create some momentum within the society as well. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the ayah before was actually saying, well, wait a minute, there's more than that. He said, جَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ فِي النَّاسِ. There's one momentum that you're supposed to be doing. You have this light that you would walk. What do you mean walk? We're not talking about just walking, meaning on your 2 feet. But we're actually talking about an inference. This is a metaphorical word to tell us that they are putting and creating a momentum, a type of activity within the society to make this as the counter effort that the kuffar are basically working in. So what are we talking about? We're talking about if the mushrikeen or the zalimeen are using the misconceptions and using the lust, then you would have to counter that, and you would have to bring about ilm in the society, and then you're going to counter the misconceptions with ilm, and you're going to counter lust and shahawat with either one, amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy al munkar, or you're probably, maybe if you're a person that is in politics, maybe you want to lay out maybe and support and sponsor the different laws to make sure that lust is not being used against the ummah to control them, but we're trying to seek the different means, whether in schools or whether in politics or whether in our society or whether in our homes or whatever it is, using, if I'm a politician, then I've got a responsibility. If I'm basically a teacher, I've got a responsibility. If I'm a parent at home, I've got a different responsibility. And you got to be smart. You got to be smart. Learn how to control the Wi-Fi, learn how to control basically the different things on the computers or whatever it is, because guess what? The zalimeen are right now going farther in using technology to use that system to control your mental system. So you, as a Muslim, you have to outsmart that. And not until we basically grow also in our technology, and that's slash power, will you really be regaining your authority, regaining your power. Because at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us that أعدوا لهم ما استطعتم من قوة. Your responsibility. أعدوا لهم. You gotta be prepared. You gotta work on creating these forces, whether that meant technology or whether that meant education or whether that meant refuting or responding to certain misconceptions, and or whether that meant in hey, the telecommunication system, whatever it is. You have to consider and recognize that you've got some homework to defeat the enemy that basically worked hard in getting control and basically putting that power in putting those tools to basically submit to the misconceptions and also the tools that they would be using in order to spread illicit behavior and lust and so forth. So you have to create the opposition. You have to create the competition. You have to create, let's say, the counter power that would basically eliminate a dhulm. Don't expect a dhulm to get eliminated by itself. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically lets us know that there is this type of war between haqq and batil. How is this haqq and batil just, that competition played out? It's played out by you. If the zalim is speaking in such audacity, it's not because the truth has no power. It's because the people of truth have shied away. They basically did not have the courage to speak up. When they didn't have the courage to speak up, when they didn't have the courage to stand for truth, that's when al-zalim had the audacity to basically brainwash, to control, to defeat Sahib al-Haq. Know that you are on Haqq. Know that you have a responsibility. Don't be shy. Don't be defeated. Be strong. And that's why you say Allahu Akbar in every single salah, in every single rak'ah. Allahu Akbar, telling you, don't be afraid. I want you to stand strong. I want you to be in power. I want you to recognize that you would get the inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to really be the one in power. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Allahu Akbar. So وَكَذَلِكَ نُوَلِّي بَعْضَ الظَّالِمِينَ بَعْضًا. So in other words, well, just as these zalimeen, they would support one another and they would also defeat one another. Wait a minute, they would support or defeat? It's actually both. They would support one another. One zalim would benefit from the other zalim, so they would basically have some form of agreement. America is benefiting from Israel's basically power in the Middle East, so they basically would support one another. Suppose that they would support one another, and you would have basically America say, well, yeah, we've always been there, and think of it as the other day, the spokesperson for America to go into the Middle East, he basically said, well, let me break it down for you. It's kind of like me inviting you to come over to my house. And if you tell me, I really like you, you're a really nice guy, but your wife, we can't really stand her. He said, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to tell my wife not to come over. I'm basically going to tell you to get out. And he said, that's the relationship between Israel and America. They're basically together. Well, thanks for putting it and laying it out and clear. But unfortunately, the Muslim Ummah is still not recognizing and thinking that one day we can probably change the narrative. And one day we can basically convince the politicians to change their stance on Israel. Well, I mean, yeah, we would have to do a lot of political work, and in the U.S., there are some people that are doing some work there, so we'll let them do some work. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize our enemies in order to recognize where we're supposed to be at and who our allies are and what we are and what we stand for and our identity. Not until then will you be capable of getting into victory. Not until you recognize your borders. And when we say your borders, there's no way that you can be having some kind of, let's say, a personal autonomy unless you let others recognize that, no, you trespass too close. No, I'm not going to mimic you and your culture. I've got my own. I don't have to speak your language in order to be called advanced or to be called privileged or to be called educated. I've got my own language. I've got my own culture / Islam. And I've got my own border in each and every single corner. Not until then, your identity as a Muslim is basically going to be strong. And not until then will you be teaching the other that, no, I don't have to be like you to be considered advanced. I don't have to be like you to somehow get respected. I don't have to be like you to somehow be considered as the one that deserves appreciation. Al-Mu'min lets others know their borders. Respect my hijab, respect my Islam, respect my Sharia, respect my definitions of what Islam basically is based on. That's what I want you to recognize. Not until then will I somehow also give some tolerance, just like when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells me that I shouldn't be swearing at your gods or your basically the things in your religion and your culture, but just like Islam tells me to respect that, I expect the same to happen in return. But not until we recognize our own hawiyya. What is that? Not until we recognize our own identity are we really going to let others recognize it. But if we're still in doubt about our own identity, then you're basically letting the other know that you're not confident even about yourself and that there's room for compromise. Not until you make it clear that I'm very proud of my hijab and this is how I'm going to do it. I'm very proud of my Islam and this is what we believe in. I'm very proud of my foundation and this is what I'm going to practice. Don't give in. Don't compromise. The second you compromise your religion for their stance, don't think that they're going to stop. They're going to continue taking one step after another to make you give up on your borders. They're basically trying to defeat you internally and then outwardly. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know these paths and letting us know how they would use these systems in order to control you. So he said, what is it as a result of? It's a result of action. What kind of action? An action, basically, one, their connection with dunya, their connection with their identity, their connection with their foundation, their connection with seeking what actually makes their identity. Because if you're not putting in the investment to learn about your identity, like in ilm or in seeking ilm, then the other option is that you're just a consumer. If you're just a consumer, then you're basically going to be the one that others would utilize against the ummah without you realizing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. What does the word yaksib mean? The word yaksib actually means to gain something. But sometimes in Lugha Arabiya, we can use a word that means one thing, but we would refer as to the opposite. So what does that mean? So in Lugha Arabiya, for example, the ayah says, وَكَانَ وَرَاءَهُمْ مَلِكٌ يَأْخُذُ كُلَّ سَفِينَةٍ غَصْبًا. That there was behind them a king that would take, or Malik, it doesn't have to be a king, but it can be any power, pirates, whatever it is, that they would basically take any passing ship by force. Now, the word wara, if I were to say behind them, that means they already passed them. But this ayah is not talking about people, some pirates that they had already passed. This is talking about this boat that is sailing. What they don't recognize is that if they continue on the same path that there is ahead, some pirates that will basically get into every passing by ship, and then they would by force basically take the ship. So what did this man that Prophet Musa, well, some call it Khadr, okay, and others say it's not al-Khadr, regardless, what did he do? Teach Prophet Musa, basically created a hole in that ship. Prophet Musa gets angry and says, why did you do that? Why did you actually right there, put a hole right in the ship that's going to make it sink? And he said, later on, he explains to him, he said, no, that's because this ship doesn't recognize the people that are controlling this ship. They don't recognize that by continuing this path, that right there, there's actually a bunch of pirates that are going to take over the ship, and they're going to lose the ship. But this way will basically give them some time to fix the ship. And by the time that they would fix the ship, those pirates would be gone. So that way, all you saw was just this evil, but you didn't recognize that the motive behind this small piece of evil was actually a wisdom that is far greater. Sometimes we would be so narrow in how we would see the smaller things, or probably different things that might happen in our life. So when you look at Lugha Arabiya, when you see this word wara'ahum, that's the same thing, بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. The word yaksib can mean to gain and could also mean as a result of a certain behavior. So when you say kasaba, as a result of a certain behavior, you would usually expect a reward. You invested probably these amount of hours to work, and then therefore you basically entered the hours, and then because you entered the hours, you basically get this much in paycheck. Okay, good for you. Okay, now this would be al-kasb. Okay, now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using the word kasaba in the same way, but it's not necessarily to mean as a reward. But this is to say that it's a result of what you had committed. And therefore, when you see the outcome, when you see the result, don't be surprised of how things play out. In other words, you put in harm, you put in sin, you put in injustice. Don't expect justice to come in return, at least in your favor. Don't expect by living a life of sin, don't expect that your life is going to basically fall as everything's going fine. What's going to come to you is basically evil, is basically harm, is basically corruption. Your children probably disown you. Your children probably abusing you. And the list goes on and on. Probably your life, basically your health, STDs, whatever it is. Well, that's because you were living a life like that. It basically is, hey, now don't blame Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for it. You're going to blame yourself. You're questioning, why did you get STDs? Well, maybe you shouldn't have been engaging in zina. You're wondering why you basically had lost this amount of money and lost your job, and right now needing to basically claim bankrupt and all of that. Well, maybe you shouldn't have needed and shouldn't have used riba. Maybe you overspent, perhaps. Maybe you were using tomorrow's money, and instead of using the way that Islam tells you that وَكُلُوا وَاشْرَبُوا وَلَا تُسْرِفُوا. Islam tells you, well, you gotta, yes, eat and drink, but don't overdo it. Maybe Islam was basically giving you the keys to not spend based on basically tomorrow's money, but Islam is telling you, I want you to do money management. Islam is teaching you do money management because you never know what might actually come up in the future. So Islam wants you to be all prepared. But now that you ended up, it's like, oh, it's not a lack of risk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you there is risk, but it's either bad money management or it's bad investment, or sometimes relapses do happen. بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْسِبُونَ. What did you do wrong? That's what Islam is always telling us to do. Review what you had done in order to correct it or in order to repent from it. At the end, Islam tells us that there is a pattern in this world. If you were defeated in a war, well, that means you got certain problems either in the way you basically had done your management, or perhaps maybe in the way that some intentions were basically gone wrong, or perhaps in the technology that you basically had used. So you would have to look into, well, what do I need to fix? If you got defeated in a war, or if you got defeated in life, or you got defeated in the situation that we're in, what are we doing wrong? Well, when the zalim becomes the place of Akbar, that means Allahu Akbar is not really played out in your life. When the zalim becomes the biggest thing, the arrogance that they would have is basically beyond us all. Well, that means we're not truly living Allahu Akbar. We've got a lot to review. بما كانوا يكسبون يا معشر الجن والإنس ألم يأتكم رسل منكم يقصون عليكم آياتي. Hold on, before we go to that one, let's actually look at al-Qurtubi. He said what that means is that that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, would basically let some oppressors be in control over the other oppressors. And then the other oppressor would basically defeat them and humiliate them. So what is that supposed to mean? He said, well, this is basically containing a threat to the oppressor that if they were not to stop and bring an end to their oppression, then expect another oppressor to basically come in and defeat that oppression. Let's see, Fudayl ibn Iyad, just an issue about Fudayl ibn Iyad. Fudayl ibn Iyad, he was considered one of the Zuhad and also Ilm. But he speaks a lot about Zuhud and Ilm. You got to remember Fudayl ibn Iyad. And there's really a lot to learn about al-Fudayl ibn Iyad. But inshallah, we'll do that later on. He said, quote, إذا رأيت ظالما ينتقم من ظالم فقف وانظر فيه متعجبا. He said, if you see one oppressor basically coming in to retaliate from another oppressor, just stand and just see the meanings and stand in awe. Why? He said, when you see one oppressor defeating another oppressor, just just don't go too fast and try to stop this oppression. No, sometimes you just got to let it go. This is important, ladies, especially ladies. Sometimes we just get too emotional. I remember when Gaddafi, when he was basically caught, and the people basically found him in like this sewer, and they started slapping him and beating him, and he got some people basically saying, well, no, we're supposed to be kind to him. Why are we doing that? How come, Islam tells us we're supposed to be kind to whomever we find as an asir, etc. We'll say, wait a minute, you're getting way too emotional here. You don't recognize the history of this person basically being in leadership, and so many people that he had killed, and so many people he had basically imprisoned in dhulm, and so many ayat that he basically had said, no, we don't need to say Qul huwa Allahu ahad, we can just say Allahu ahad, and mocked Islam and changed so many things about the religion, and even considered that his green book was actually supposed to replace the Quran. That's how much of a kafir he is. But you have sometimes people just getting too carried away with their emotions, and thinking that, no, we're supposed to be nice. It's like, wait a minute. Fudayl ibn Iyad tells you, إِذَا رَأَيْتَ ظَالِمًا يُنْتَقَمْ أَوْ يَنْتَقِمُ مِنْ ظَالِمٍ فَقِفْ. If you see someone basically teaching this oppressive person, this oppressor, teaching them a lesson, let them get their punishment, and just stand and let it play on its own. Not every single time you would basically have to get into the emotions and say, ya haram, and basically pity them. Sometimes it's to teach others a lesson. Let's see Ibn Abbas, he said, إِذَا رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْ قَوْمٍ وَلَّا أَمْرَهُمْ خِيَارَهُم وَإِذَا سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَى قَوْمٍ وَلَّا أَمْرَهُمْ شِرَارَهُم. So scary. He said, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is Ibn Abbas, the Prophet's cousin, said, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is content over any group of people, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have the best of them be the ones in their leadership. In other words, كَمَا تَكُونُوا يُوَلَّى عَلَيْكُمْ. The way that you basically are is going to determine who is in power and who's actually in leadership. Who are you? Each and every single individual. What are you? Who are you? Don't expect a regime change until the society and the population changes itself. We've got to work on changing the society. And once the society changes, that's when that will basically bring about, let's say, that momentum to change from the up of that pyramid. It all goes in directions, each from a different angle. Of course, somebody might say, well, I thought Uthman bin Affan said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَزَعُ بِالسُّلْطَانِ مَا لَا يَزَعُ بِالْقُرْآنِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may put the power in the leader more than the power of what the Quran may put on ground. How do we understand the two? Are they contradictory? Should we basically bring good leaders to change, let's call it, the population? Or do we change the population to bring the good leaders? We have to work on all ends. It's not just one end. Don't expect change to basically happen just by a leader coming up. Even if you were to have Umar ibn al-Khattab basically be the one in leadership, Umar ibn al-Khattab, yes, definitely Khalifa al-Adil, etc., but he had a whole bunch of Sahaba that were also working with him to make this happen. He had a whole group of Sahaba. Each was working on one end. Each recognized that they have a responsibility towards the deen. Umar ibn Khattab could not have done it alone. Umar ibn Khattab, he was in Medina. But all the other Sahaba, the one that basically led the army in al-Qadisiyah was Khalid ibn al-Walid or Amr ibn al-As. And the one to continue all the way to Egypt and all the way to basically Palestine and all of, they were the other khulafa. They were, the other leaders. Umar ibn Khattab could not have done it alone. He basically had put the right people in the right place, and at the same time, the society felt the commitment to also engage. If, let's say, the leader, Khalid ibn al-Walid, wanted to wage the war, let's say against, or Amr ibn al-As wanted to wage the war against the Persians, if he didn't have the soldiers to also come in and participate in that battle, Amr ibn al-As and Khalid ibn al-Walid would not have been capable of doing it on their own. So what do we need to do? We can't just work on one corner. We need to work on the corner from, let's say, the high point in the pyramid, that is the leaders, and we also need to work on those that are the society. Do our job. Never say that, oh, well, the situation is so bad. The political situation is so bad. It's basically the leader's fault. They've got their faults for sure. But we have to work on all ends. And whatever power you basically have to make a change, do so. And that's basically telling us right there. How do we, وَلَّا أَمْرَهُمْ خِيَارَهُمْ, be the person that is a good person, and you will see that will create a momentum within the society, within your masjid, within your school, within your country, within the even farther than that. All right. وَإِذَا سَخِطَ اللَّهُ عَلَىٰ قَوْمٍ وَلَّا أَمْرَهُمْ شَرَارَهُمْ وَلَّا أَمْرَهُمْ شِرَارَهُمْ. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not content over any group, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make the worst of the figures within that society basically take over. They'll be in leadership. And the Prophet ﷺ, let's see, in the hadith, مَنْ أَعَانَ ظَالِمًا سَلَّطَهُ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ. Whoever supports an oppressor, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will let that zalim basically oppress them as well. This is very scary. It's like you were supporting an oppressor. Now they're going to be basically coming at you. All right. And so how did this even happen? نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى. In another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى. In other words, they will, whatever they had used as their place of authority, they'll be the ones responsible to basically let it determine where they're going. Let's say, and Ibn Abbas also said, هو أن الله إذا أراد بقوم شرا ولا أمرهم شرارهم. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed that any group of people would be punished, basically, in other words, does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will evil? Wait a minute, does Allah will evil? So أراد بقوم شرا, does he will evil? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only wills good things. Right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only wills good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's why a believer says, وَالشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْكَ. Evil, we would not attribute it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why did he say that? He said, وَالشَّرُّ لَيْسَ إِلَيْكَ تَأَدُّبًا, as in etiquette, as in discipline. in how we recognize, even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, min sharri ma khalaq, from the evils of what He had created. In other words, some of it you would see that this is evil, but you would never attribute evil to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you have to recognize that absolute evil can never happen from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all. وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has only good names and only good attributes, and therefore you would see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the angle of Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. But that doesn't mean He isn't also the one to be Al-Jabbar, Al-Mut'al, that He is the one that defeats, Al-Jabbar, to be the one in might to defeat oppression. He's the one in might to defeat oppression. So therefore, you would recognize the comprehensiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only wills good, but He will harm to those people as a result of what they had committed. Why? Because He is al-adil, because He is most just. Sometimes justice is in holding people accountable for what they had committed. It's not always just to be nice and just to be basically the one merciful on even the oppressors, but part of being nice is being just. Those that go wrong, they need to be held accountable and punished for the injustice that they had committed. So that's very similar when we look at the word yaksibun, very similar to this ayah. وَمَا أَصَابَكُم مِّن مُّصِيبَةٍ فَبِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِيكُمْ. What does that mean? Every calamity that happens is a result of what you had committed. Is a result of what you had committed. So what is that supposed to mean? When you say every calamity, so what about things, let's just say someone got cancer or a heart problem or a disease. Does that mean that I deserved it? Not necessarily. Not every calamity is basically a punishment for something that you had committed. Not every calamity. Some calamity is to cleanse the person. That's why when a person gets sick, we would say, tahur. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this something that will cleanse you from the sins that you might have committed. So we would say, tahur, may this be a sin cleanser. The Prophet ﷺ said, ajaban li amri al-mu'min. A believer is a strange one. A believer is different than anyone else. Whenever something good happens, they would be thankful. Whenever a calamity happens, they would recognize what? Sabr. They would recognize that I would have to be patient, for it may be a sin cleanser, or it may be to basically squeeze me in order to close the doors of different areas in dunya to only connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what are we doing? We're basically then looking at the masa'ib and the calamities that we face from different angles. We don't judge every single angle to be basically just as this ayah. When you want to understand the Quran, you basically have to connect the different areas in the Quran, the different ayat that basically give you more details to fully understand what the ayat are saying. Isn't until then do we have a comprehensive vision to understand how we interpret the different data or interpret the different contexts. This is extremely important. You can't just take one ayah and say this is exclusive to this, every single calamity. You know what? You deserve what you're going through. Not too fast. Not too fast. Because some is not necessarily within this and fitting within this ayah. We've got another ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَبْلُوَكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ فِتْنَةً. And you would be pricked by evil and even good. So even good is make it be containing some evil within it, or some good. You may think of it as containing all good, but the truth of the matter, it's basically a delusion without you realizing. Because the kuffar themselves, they thought, well, hey, we're actually on the right side of history here. We're doing the right thing. Biggest proof is, look, we're actually in power. We're plus, look at us. We got all the resources. And plus, just like, when you look at, the American politicians, they'll tell you, hey, we're actually making America great again. We're on the right side of history. And what are they doing? They're like, yeah, well, I mean, we got the money, we got the resources. Like, you got the resources, or did you steal these resources? Let's put things in the right context and the right interpretation. When you went to Iraq, did you steal the oil, or what did you really use? And what did you really do? You basically killed 1 million people. And Madeleine Albright said it was it. At the time, she said it's basically worth it. Well, of course, it was worth the oil. It's okay if 1 million child dies. Doesn't matter. It's okay if we basically get the people in Gaza all basically ethnically cleansed and all of that. Doesn't matter as long as we get the natural gas as a resource. It doesn't matter. It's all worth it. It's okay. Because to them, they know no akhlaq. They know no akhlaq. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that some zalimeen, they would actually use this as a way to debate you and tell you, look, we're successful. Look, we got the money, we got this, and look at all the different successes that we got. But what you need to do is really expose those lies and say, well, let's talk about the money. Let's talk about the resources. Let's talk about the life. Let's talk about the increase in crime rate. Let's talk about the increase in mental health disorders. Let's talk about the increase in single parents, and let's talk about the increase in homelessness in the US. Let's talk about that. Let's not confuse the masses and making them think that, yeah, you're making America great again, when what you're really doing is that you're confusing the masses. It's so funny. He came out and actually said, hey, we basically got a cure to autism. It's like, wait a minute, you got cure to autism? Really? Wow, that's great. And then you discover that no, that wasn't a cure to autism, and that they had been using this type of medication for one particular disorder in one particular type of autism that is basically a deficiency or whatever, a disorder that basically happens in the spine, and that they had been using this medication for a very long time. You didn't bring anything new, but it's to manipulate the masses that say, my governance is basically bringing cure. And look, I'm making America great again. India. Manipulating the masses. And that's the same thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know, that don't get in this delusion thinking of somebody's success, or you may see certain successes, that somehow it's basically because they're following the right system. نبلوكم بالشر والخير فتنة. Some of that khair could actually be fitna to you. Be careful. Make sure you read things in the right way. Make sure you recognize that not just because your friend, she basically was doing basically going into this type of schooling. It was not teaching them Islam. It was not teaching them, but hey, her son became a businessman, a very successful businessman, and they got lots of money, etc. But they lost really their deen. But she's going to come to you and say, well, guess what? Look, our beautiful house. Look, the cars. Look, the money, all of that. See, you want to debate that? I'm not successful? Look at me. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, you got to make sure you have the right reading. The true reading is that, is this leading to Jannah? That's the true success. Is this leading to Jannah? Or is this just leading to successes in dunya? نَبْلُوَكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ. You may get some harm right there, but this harm may either be used as a way to basically say, well, I'm a victim with this victim mindset, or you can use the harm that you may be facing as a way to go up higher. We're seeing right now the society is basically playing the trauma card each and every single time, thinking that the world is supposed to be a Jannah. Never in history did we live this kind of mindset. Never in history did we live this kind of mindset that thinks that the world is supposed to be an open heaven and that everything's supposed to be working just fine. And of course, who's always right now the one that the children and people are basically pointing at as the ones to be the oppressors, the narcissists? It's basically the parents. The parents. Right now, the scheme that these dhalimeen are doing in order to control the younger generation, they're using Hollywood, they're using these systems in education systems and even the so-called therapy industry in order to do what? To confuse the children, to confuse and basically manipulate the children that you are a result of your parents' narcissist behavior, and that your parents were basically just the ones that are practicing their trauma on you, and here you are, you're basically now traumatized, and your parents did not do enough for you. And then the children, they basically grow thinking that everything's supposed to be, that they're entitled and everything's supposed to basically happen on its own, and that they don't have to put in anything because the parents were the ones that are to be responsible when their schooling didn't go right, when their job didn't go right. Why? Because they were the victims. And right now, look at them. They're basically have to be living in trauma for what their parents had done to them. And they really need to get treatment. And guess what? They're never going to get treatment because the mindset in itself is actually crooked. The second that you think that your parents, when they put you in school, that they were supposed to basically make success as, yes, they have to guarantee it. Sorry, they can't guarantee success for you. They can put you in school, but you have to put in the effort to bring success. They can't guarantee that for you. Same thing. I can give you the keys, but I can't guarantee basically that everything will go beautiful for you. Now we are getting children that are entitled, thinking that, yes, marriage is supposed to be successful, and everybody is supposed to be just happy and all of that. And then they discover the reality that the world is actually not like that. That not until you compromise, not until you put the effort, not until you learn how to work on your social skills, not until you learn how to hold your tongue and not hurt others with it, and not until you learn how to clean your own home and not wait for mom to clean it for you, and not until you learn how to grow up and think like an adult, and how to think that you are supposed to be responsible, will anything change? Islam tells you that, no, don't think you're entitled. That's why you don't see a lot of parenting done in the Quran. It's basically letting you know, it's talking to you. It's not telling you, okay, hold your parents accountable. It's telling you, no, I want you to hold yourself accountable. Don't start blaming X and Y and Z for your failures. No, you hold accountability for your failures when they go wrong. That's basically بما كسبت أيديكم. What did you do? Don't go blaming your father and your mother, because at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, even when your father and mother go wrong, He tells you at the end, He said, صاحبهما في الدنيا معروفة. You just have one responsibility to do. Accompany them on good terms, and that's all. Can't I retaliate for the trauma that they had caused? The ayah tells you, no, you cannot. Why not? I mean, it's fair, isn't it? The ayah tells you, no, it's not. Well, why isn't it fair? Because you don't even recognize all the contribution that they had done. So all you do is just complain about the side that you thought was basically an injustice. You didn't see all the contribution that they had done. So in other words, you are lacking a fair and an unbiased vision. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, well, as the one to know how He created their fitrah and how He created them, He will tell you, all I want you to do is that I want you to consider that the default is that they had invested in good, even if they had harmed you. And I want you to bring about the default that you live the principle, even when others did not. And even when others fail to live the principle, you live the principle because you recognize that you live the principle for Allah, and you don't live the principle to gain some power or anything in return. You may never get anything in return from your parents because they're too old. You're not going to change them. And by the way, don't expect to parent your parent. They will always see see you as their child. So if you think that you're going to parent your parent, you're confusing the roles. It's not going to happen. All right. I do recognize that, we have a couple of things that people wrote in the chat. So inshallah, we will continue tomorrow. I know we didn't actually actually tomorrow we've got the fiqh of marriage. Stay tuned for that one. That's going to be fun. So our cue is what we discussed before, turning towards akhirah, opposite of loving dunya, remembering death and getting ready for life after death, opposite of disliking death. Absolutely. Absolutely. Good job. Good job. So any questions before we end here? Okay, nobody.
Is there any difference between al-zalimin and jahilin? I mean,
yes. So one is more let's say comprehensive than the other. Al-jahil is an ignorant person, okay, at least literally. Al-jahil could be a person that is ignorant in their behavior or their ilm, or al-jahil could also be ignorant in their in their basically actions or behavior. Okay, did I mention that one? Zalim is looking at it as their actions are basically gone wrong. They had exceeded the limit. Okay, but a zalim could also be to exceed the limit not only in action, to mean the way that you would relate with other people within a social dynamic, because in Islam, whether it's a social dynamic or whether it's, let's call it, a mental relationship, in other words, how you understand the ideology, how you understand your relationship with the world, your relationship with the society around you, your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. So if you exceed the limit, this would be dhulm. You exceed the limit in what you understand about the relationship between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You exceed the limit when you basically have your social relations basically exceeded the limit, gone wrong, and so forth. So al-dhulm is jahl from one perspective, okay? It's a form of jahl, but al-jahl is more comprehensive than dhulm. And of course, it's debatable. Other scholars might say, actually, we disagree with you. Al-dhulm is more comprehensive, okay? At the end, they're both going wrong, but al-jahl would go wrong in terms of the motive, okay? Al-jahl would go wrong in terms of the motive, and al-dhulm would go wrong in terms of the practice. All right?
Right.
Al-dhulm,
Right.
in terms of practice, they would basically engage in exceeding the limit. Or sometimes al-dhulm could not necessarily exceed the limit, but can exceed the limit in either way, putting too much of something or putting too little of it. All
Right.
right?
Yeah, right. And when you were explaining, you said Zalimin, they might have more supporter, like one Zalim can benefit the other Zalim, right? So I was just wondering if, like, when in Ayat Karima, Surah, that is the dua of Prophet Yunus, like, like I'm from the Zalimeen. So, I mean, that the context of the meaning will be different there. Like,
Right. So when
I mean,
he said,
yeah,
basically that dua, when he was talking about himself as dhalimin, not that he was as a dhalim, meaning that he is part of the dhalimin, like the bigger dhalimin, but he
right.
considered himself with the action of
Hmm.
abandoning the mission that he was put to deliver, to do that da'wah, and abandoning that mission, that was basically putting him as part of the ones that exceeded the limit.
Right.
Okay. But that does not mean that we would say, yeah, Prophet Yunus is a dhalim. Look, I've got the evidence that he himself is confessing. No, this is a way to make dua. This is from the adab. This is from the manner to basically recognize the shortcomings, recognize that when one goes wrong, they would say, Subhanaka la ilaha illa anta inni kuntu min al-dhalimin. Right?
Right. Right. I mean, yes, I get like the meaning according to the context. There, I mean, he was admitting that, like, I might have done like mistake. So yes, I get it. Yeah, because when you said the Zalimin are the one, those benefit the other Zalim. So I was thinking at that point. Okay, now I mean, yes, that is the same purpose of like purpose of crossing some limit. That is
Right.
okay,
So
fine.
the ones crossing the limit, this ayah, when it talks about كذلك نولي بعض الظالمين بعضا بما كانوا يكسبون, this is talking about الظالمين, whether we're speaking about those positions or in political ظلم, or whether it's in justice and in the smaller even areas, or whether economical, or whether it's I don't know, a stepmother abusing her
Right,
stepson, etc. So all of those would be included in الظالمين.
right,
So at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that there is a rule, there's a system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes when somebody is committing oppression. Another oppressor will basically come in and oppress them, but this wouldn't be considered as oppression, but that would be a retaliation. This isn't meaning that this dhalim will not be held accountable for what they're doing. Okay, they will
right,
be held accountable for what they're doing, but this is just to let us know that a person's oppression will not go unquestioned, or will not go and let them get carried away with it. That they will be, one day, they will be accountable. They will be
yes,
basically punished for it, And even if it's other ظالمين that are even, perhaps even worse than the just rulers, and that way to teach them a lesson. That's basically to let us know that when you abuse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send others to abuse you.
Right, right.
So fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be just.
Right.
So this is
That
it. Go ahead, dear.
Yeah, that is exactly what is happening on international. I can feel so. Yes, exactly.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Allah al-Musta'an. Allah al-Musta'an. So inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow with fiqh of marriage. So ladies, join us tomorrow. We've got a lot of things to talk about, inshallah. And tomorrow is our second class, because the first class we just did like an intro to fiqh, but this time we're going to start the real deal about